Hey there, everybody. Wolfie Cass back with another video. This one's going to be a little different than the most recent one. It's actually going to be more like an instructional video. So, uh, as the game is getting closer and closer to release and will hopefully reach a broader audience, I've decided that I'm just going to let you guys, or show you guys the different debuffs that exist in the game. So there are a bunch of debuffs. Every hero has access to a ton of different debuffs, either with their innate abilities or somewhere in their upgrade trees. And they all do a lot of different stuff. There's a bunch of them, and it's not immediately visible at a cursor glance what they do. I will say, Gearbox and the company that's working on this game now, they have made great strides in kind of explaining a little better on what some of these do. But I'll just kind of go with a bit of an in-depth guide here, kind of a breakdown of what they do. So to start off, status effects are broken down into three individual kind of subcategories. There are debuffs, which are basically just short-term duration effects that kind of hinder you in some way. There are degenerations, or just degens for short, that mostly do damage over time effects, but some have a secondary effect. And then there are hit reactions, and hit reactions are kind of basically what will stop you from being able to act to a certain extent. And sometimes that can be a very brief thing like an interrupt, or something more long duration like a stun. But here we are in the kind of the practice area map. I am in the offline mode currently, so I'm just kind of walking around on Sven here. And there's a space in like the western part of the map here that has a lot of these little dinosaur monsters called Motigas, and they're actually all labeled with a different. They're all labeled with a different status effect, and if you get hit by their fireball, they actually inflict you with that condition for a little time. So they're just kind of in this space. There's a lot of them, and I'm just going to go over them based on the first ones that I see. So the first one here is weakness. So when you walk up to one, there's actually a little text box that pops up on the right side. It says weakness reduces outgoing damage by 25%, major weakness 50%, and extreme weakness 75% are more powerful versions. So essentially, for the duration of having weakness, you deal less damage. That is the very simplest way to put it. So if I were to attack, each of my kind of flasks here do about 84 damage a pop, and then if it attacks me, I get afflicted with weakness, and you can see that each of my attacks are doing less damage. This Motiga actually inflicts major weakness. Oh, I also say that each status effect comes with its own like special unique effect, particle effect. So like you see that Sven's hands have that kind of purple glow. You are under the weakness debuff, and you and allies and enemies can all see that. So that is weakness. Weakness always is for a set duration. If your upgrade or ability says weakness on it, it is always for a fixed amount of 25%, unless it says otherwise. Or if it says like major weakness and extreme weakness, which are the better versions, like it says in the tooltip. But that's weakness. Next one over here is Daze. Daze is a hit reaction, which if you are hit by it, quite literally stops you and prevents you from using skills. What it doesn't tell you is that it also does not let you sprint or dodge. Those are considered skills in the game. So right now I'm sprinting. If I kind of sprint in a space and I get hit by it, then I'm suddenly not able to sprint. I also can't dodge. I just dodge avoid that one. But yeah, I can't use my stamina to dodge. And right as I break out, you see I kind of do that dodge animation. But that's Daze. That is a hit reaction. Daze is a very, I wouldn't say it's super common, but it's definitely something to be on the lookout for, kind of knowing if that's in your enemy's repertoire. We'll move over here next to Slow. Slow is a debuff effect that quite literally just slows your movement. I believe this one actually inflicts major slow. Yeah, it feels major slow. But slow does not have a particle effect actually. Well, There it is. Yeah, it's major slow. It's kind of that purplish haze at the feet. I don't know why it wasn't reacting or like wasn't showing on some of those hits. But slow reduces your movement speed by 20%. Every slow is the same 20% reduction, but there are two greater versions. The box says major slow 30% and massive slow 60%. Slow does not deal damage over time. It's just a effect that slows your character. But otherwise, you're still technically able to sprint. You're still able to dodge. You're still able to jump normally. Oh, that's something I should say with Daze as well. Being dazed does not prevent you from being able to jump, but it does not let you sprint or dodge. And then, of course, the Daze effect is the kind of swirly star cuckoo kind of particle effects around your character's head. This one here is Interrupt. It's very similar to Daze. It's just a much shorter duration. So when you actually get hit by it, if you're not doing anything, you actually just take the effect of whatever is hitting you. In this case, just the fireball. That is 85 damage. But if I start attacking and then I get hit by the fireball, you see as I get that very brief like stop of what I'm doing. So this is really good to have to stop the channels of power in the game modes. The rush map, especially with Interrupt being its most powerful version. But this also like works to interrupt like channeled abilities like Taito's spin or Oru's ultimate, Oru's focus. If you interrupt them, then it stops them immediately in their tracks before they can finish or continue what they were doing. But next is stun. Stun interrupts and prevents skill usage and movement for the duration of the stun. So quite literally just locks you down in place. So if you get hit by it, can't move whatsoever. This one has a very strong audio cue, just kind of that kind of low-pitched gong, almost like noise. And then your character does a unique animation and then has the stars over their head, similar to the Daze. And yeah, you're stunned for the duration. Stuns can be half a second. Stuns can be 1.5 seconds. It's all really depends. All right, next one is push. Very straightforward, simple to understand. Push, you get hit by it, you get pushed away. Pushes are divided into push away and push up or knock up. It really depends on the terminology you feel like you want to use. But essentially just pushes you back a fixed distance, or pushes you upwards. Basically stops you from doing anything that requires you to stand still, but you are entirely able to act while you're moving in the air. So if I'm attacking and then I get hit by the push, I'm still technically able to, attack here, but I have to kind of readjust and re-aim as I'm flying. And also, like, it's really hard to kind of give yourself or reorient yourself and stop you from flying a certain direction. Like, you have a bit of movement. Like, if I let go here, I just kind of fly backwards. But if I go back to the same spot and I hold to the right, like, I can still sort of move to the right and stop myself from moving that way. But for the most part, I'm still I'm still more or less stuck in that trajectory. But the next one here is launch. Launch is very similar to push, except launch also kind of stuns you at the same time that you're being launched. So it completely prevents you from using any skills or abilities while you're being launched, and you are not broken from the launch until you land. And why is that important, you say? Well, if I get launched this way and I just kind of land near the same kind of altitude that I'm in, it's pretty short. But if I go on this side, I get hit by the launch, I am stunned for that entire duration from that top end to the bottom. So kind of launches are really good to use when enemies on cliffs, because then they can't save themselves, like, quite literally. But otherwise, launches, just like pushes, are broken down into launch up or launch away. Launch ups obviously just knock you straight upwards. So like Margrave's focus or Gnosis' goring up upgrade, those launch just straight upwards. And then launch away, there are upgrades on Sven's Q that kind of does the full launch away. And yeah, so that's those over there. I did slow. Next one is here is Cracked Armor. Cracked Armor is a degen effect, but it's also kind of halfway in between a degeneration and just a debuff. But cracked armor reduces your armor by 10 and does a bit of damage over time. And then there's a stronger version called broken armor that reduces armor by 25. The tooltip here doesn't say the fact that it does. It just says that it does damage over time. But a fun fact, all cracked armor and all broken armor effects do the same amount of damage over time, regardless of the source, unless it specifically says otherwise. But I believe every upgrade, every instance of cracked or broken armor in the game does not have like a special interaction. So cracked armor, you essentially take 15 damage every second that you're affected by cracked armor, and your armor is reduced for that amount. This Motiga actually does broken armor, so it's a little stronger. But the cracked armor only does 10 damage and reduces your armor by 10. Yeah, so 10 damage over time and 10 armor reduction, and then broken armor, 25 armor reduced and 15 damage over time. And while you have broken armor, you have kind of this particle effect of these like triangles that are kind of emanating from your midsection. Then your armor is broken. Up here we have Cripple. Cripple is an effect that is very similar to Slow. It's just much stronger. It reduces your movement speed by 40%. It also prevents you from jumping higher. So if you are crippled, you are not able to escape very easily. You better hope that you better hope your only escape path is not a higher ledge, because you are not getting on there. What this tooltip does not tell you actually is that crippled also prevents you from being able to use jump pads. So if I have this on, I can't use it. But as soon as that cripple is done, I can use the jump pad no problem. And then of course the cripple, kind of the particle effect, are these rotating circles going like downward, kind of this spiral thing that looks like it's rooting you to the floor. Over here we have Curse. Curse removes buffs and prevents any buffs from being applied to the affected target. This effect can be cleansed. All effects can be cleansed except for hit reactions. I'm not sure why this tooltip specifies. Maybe it's because cleanse is considered like a buff, and the whole point of Curse is to not be able to be buffed. But yeah, I understand why that's there, actually, now that I say it. But yeah, Cursed has this effect, kind of this ghostly purple and black particle effect that slowly swirls around your character. And yeah, this kind of, I mean, it's mostly like damage and armor effects, as well as like personal shields, except for Rutger, because his is tied to a passive effect. Like, yeah, it's mostly damage and armor upgrades that gets removed by Curse, as well as heal over times, I believe. Not burst healings from like Sven's healing waters. Like that burst healing still has effect, but there is like a small, or rather, I think there's an upgrade that does this one does healing over time. So that healing, I think, would get removed. Let me actually test that now. I'm not 100% certain. So if I get that healing glow, then yeah, I'm not getting healed anymore. Or no, I am, actually. So yeah, it must quite literally just be like damage buffs and damage buffs. Maybe it removes something like stealth or deflection, or maybe like speed boosts as well. But either way, that is Curse. All right, and then the rest of these over here in the corner are all degen effects. So we're going to start with Bleed. Bleed over here, quite literally, just does damage over time. What's significant about Bleed is that it does that Bleed ignores the armor of the target. So it will always do the maximum damage that it says on whatever tooltip of the ability. And all bleeds vary. You know, each character that has bleeds, and even characters that have multiple bleeds, every single bleed has a different value of damage that it does over time. This Motiga specifically does 50 damage over time with bleed, so you can kind of see ticking near my character. I'm going to get rid of that upgrade super fast so I don't like keep confusing myself. But yeah, I'm taking 50 damage per second from the bleed effect. I also have that particle effect of like my body and like under my arms look like that like red haze kind of dripping particle effect that looks like I'm just bleeding heavily. Then you're under the effect of the bleed. Burn is very, very similar to bleed, except it does basically the same exact thing, except burns do not ignore armor. So Sven, every character has an armor value that are broken into lightly armored and heavily armored. Lightly armored, every character that is lightly armored has 15 armor. Every character that is heavily armored has 25 armor. So this burn effect on this creature is actually also 50 damage, just like the bleed. But you can see as it's ticking, kind of looking just over my character, it's only do 42 damage because I have that 15 armor. So yeah, that's burn. Burns much like bleeds as well. Every burn is unique, so it entirely depends on the ability description of where the burn is being sourced from. The damage changes, and the duration can also change. It's not for a fixed amount. Next, we have freeze. Freeze does damage over time. Freeze does not ignore armor, so much like burn, but it also slows the opponent. So when you're frozen, your movement speed is reduced by 20%, and you move slower and you take damage over time. I believe this one's also 50. Yeah, it does 50 ticking damage, so because of my armor, it's only doing 42. Freezes also come with two little subcategories. There is the deep freeze and the full freeze. I believe the deep freeze... These might be individually valued, but I believe deep freeze is a 40% slow and full freeze is like 60% or maybe even 70. But those could be unique depending on the source. I know Amani has a deep freeze. I know Paco obviously has deep freeze. And the next upcoming character, Kajir, I know he has a freeze somewhere in his kit. But that's freeze. All right, this one's a fun one. Shock. Shock deals damage over time. Ignore. Excuse me, words. Shock deals damage over time for a set duration, and when the duration expires, it actually does a big burst of damage in an AoE. So kind of that, you kind of have that crackling lightning effect around you. You kind of blue-white glow, and then you explode in this radial burst that does more damage. Shock does not ignore armor, just like freeze, just like burn. So it can be like the number is reduced depending on your armor, and I believe that goes for the burst as well. So the burst will do a little bit less damage if you have higher armor. The interesting thing about shock as well, if the same source of damage reapplies the shock, then the debuff just refreshes and it doesn't actually do the full explosion effect. But as far as I know, there's no like continuous source of shock except for like Griselma's hands on one upgrade that applies shock if the hands hit a target that she's attacking with her beam. But even then, those individually like burst. I've seen it happen. And then finally over here we have poison. So poison is a non-armor ignoring degeneration that reduces your healing received by 50%, and then there's a heavy poison that does 75% healing reduction. So this is the best way to shut down healers. Also, the particle effect is really gross. You just kind of have this sickly green, like dripping fixture, similar to bleed, but it's like all around your backside, and there's like bubbles that follow you around. But just to prove that it does less healing, that did 125 with like 25 per second ticks. And then if I wait for the cooldown to come back up, I believe it'd be 250. Yeah, it'd be an initial 250. Oh, let me get back in combat before I ruin it. There we go. So yeah, get rid of... Wait for that to expire. And then, yeah, 250 with 50 per second healing intervals. So yeah, those are all the effects that are listed out here. And they're all unique, they're all fun, they're all frustrating, but it's important to know what they do. There are a few more that technically aren't here. One to consider, kind of technically a debuff, is hard landing. So hard landing is very much like Cripple, except it's only for a moment. Like it's for a very brief moment of like maybe a half to 2/3 of a second. And I believe all hard landings are self-inflicted, but essentially if you land from a very high position, then you get hard landing, and then you have like this effect. But hard landing is just, yeah, it stops you from being able to jump and sprint until you finish that animation of the landing. And then there is Immobilize. Immobilize, another pretty rare debuff in the game. But Immobilize interrupts and locks in place. It prevents you from being able to walk, sprint, jump, and dodge, but you can still use abilities like normal. And then finally there is, I guess that's technically it. I mean, unless you want to count like Sven's ults that turns you into that polymorphs you into the dinosaurs. So I throw it way too far. That went crazy far. Anyway, but yeah, that's it. And then there's Zenobia's ultimate, which is Disable. It is coded as Disable as its unique debuff, which essentially prevents you from performing any actions, and you also cannot like be affected by your allies or your enemies in any way. So you're kind of phased out of existence briefly. But that is all the debuffs. That is all the status effects in the game. Hope you found this informative, and hope this kind of lets you explore a little better of what your favorite hero is capable of doing and kind of what it means when you pick those upgrades. And yeah, if you enjoyed, please make sure to like and share. Please inform everybody of this video, because I know when the game comes out and people aren't sure of all what's happening, you know, they're not going to want to read. They might want someone to tell them what it does. But anyway, have a good night. See you next time.